Well, I started my musical journey. I would have been about seven, I suppose, in Westmoreland Primary School. I grew up in the village where the festival now is. I started the violin. Um, I used to have my lessons in the school kitchen. So while I was sort of playing very badly, I remember sort of smelling ravioli and spaghetti and things being cooked while we were doing the violin. I don't think you could get away with doing that now because of health and safety. But I kind of very quickly got really enthusiastic about music, and I knew from very early age really that that's what I wanted to do as a career. So I I've, I worked internationally as a violinist, and latterly I've been working more as a conductor, and it kind of occurred to me that where I'd grown up had all these incredible sort of historic buildings and with a very rich history dating back to Roman times and beyond that, actually. But there was no culture in terms of music, no history of professional concerts, no real engagement with schools with music. And I went back to my former primary school, this was about 11 years ago, and I very quickly realised that there was little music going on, and it just made me feel really a bit depressed. And I thought, well, I know all these amazing musicians and people working in the arts. Maybe now is the time to put something back into where I grew up and set up a festival and actually bring outstanding musicians and composers, actors, dancers, all the different areas of the arts, bring them into a local community and inspire people through creativity, concerts, workshops, outreach events. And it's kind of grown from that. I wouldn't say it's been easy, and I've learned a huge amount over the last decade, needless to say, about sort of fundraising, marketing, what works, what doesn't work. And we're very fortunate with Music and Malling that we have a lot of local involvement. And my kind of aim has always been to have something that is primarily local, but it acts as a resource regionally and nationally, and it sets an example of what can be achieved in a small community without being pretentious or grand. Our ticket prices are very reasonable. We try and make things as inclusive as possible. We also really try very hard to break down the barriers that might exist, mainly through perception between the audience and the artists. And we do a lot of work to do that. And I think when I look back over the last 10 years, we've achieved more than I could have ever have imagined in many different respects. And of course, with the COVID curveball that has occurred, the easiest thing would have been not to do anything and just sit it out. But I kind of thought about this, and I thought actually we need to change what we do, because we can do nothing about concerts. We can't do anything about social distancing. Concerts aren't viable without an audience, and people don't really want to go to a concert where it doesn't really feel like it used to. So I thought, well, maybe we have to treat this as an opportunity to find new ways of reaching new audiences and basically having the same elements that we've always had, which has been contemporary music, supporting outstanding living composers, outreach, and high-level concerts that range across 400 years of music. So at the earliest piece will be this year by Dowland, and some of the pieces on the Go Compose workshops we have will be world premieres. So we've got everything from 400 years ago to now. The challenges have been a lot, but I've had a lot of help and support. And I think it's difficult for musicians because we spend so much of our time refining our art, refining our playing, or if you're a singer, your voice, if you're a composer, your technique and imagination. And this pandemic is, certainly in my case, I've had to try and grapple with things that I would normally not have to think about, like technology and how you can actually make it effective. And I think it's a risk and I'm not sure how successful it will be. But what I do know is that you have to try things, and if they don't work, you have to learn why they didn't work. And some things will work really well, and other things won't. And I think as long as you accept that, then this whole period is not so bad. But if you let it get on top of you and you lose your creativity and your will to try hard and do, keep things going in some shape or form, I think that is a real problem. So I've tried under the lockdown to keep going, to try and focus on things that make a positive impact. Needless to say, all our artists are being paid more than they're being paid above what they would normally get for concert fees, because obviously doing recording, pre-recording is very time-consuming. And so I'm actually primarily, I'm really glad that I've been able to help some of my colleagues, many of whom have lost an enormous amount of work. And it's quite an emotional thing, seeing people that you've worked with for 20 years and they just really love what they do. And it's kind of tragic that they've been prevented from doing that. But in its own small way, I think we have to embrace the changes and we have to look at adapting what we've taken for granted into something else. And I firmly believe that in a couple of years' time, many arts organisations, the ones that are still standing, will have a combination of online and live, and it makes sense. I think these things they were trends that were happening over the last decade, and this whole COVID situation has brought it into very sharp focus. So we've suddenly had to adapt very quickly, whereas it might, if this hadn't have happened, it would be maybe another 5 or 10 years, and you'd suddenly find that people would do it. But now they have to do it. You have to embrace the change or not do music. It's really that simple. And I've always been someone that has always tried to do things and tried to find ways of making things happen rather than finding reasons for them not happening. And I think that has actually been quite a useful thing to have in these circumstances. And I wouldn't say it has been easy, and I know a lot of people don't have that, but I think you have to kind of turn these situations into something positive. Otherwise, it's just too much to think about, quite frankly. So yeah, that's basically the background to the festival.
Obviously, in a week where the viability of freelance musicians' work is being debated and discussed, do you think that online streamed festivals and concerts like yours can help to provide a viable business model for artists?
I think they can, up to a point, and of course they're providing work, and there are two elements here. One is mental and one is financial. And I think it's complicated because in a way musicians and freelance artists are more complicated. It's a more complicated thing than if you say make walls, because you can learn to make a wall in 6 months if you go on a course. But to learn the violin to the level that I've had to learn it takes years, and I'm still learning. And all that investment that's gone into my training from the government is a huge public investment. And so artists, musicians, they're a public resource. That investment that's been made in their training is something for the benefit of the whole country, not just in terms of the money and the revenue it brings. It's also to do with well-being, and actually these people are providing lessons to people. They're inspiring young people. They're playing on pop tracks, film scores, concerts, at people's weddings. I mean, there's a massive, massive amount of stuff. And then you have all the ecosystem that is based around that. And it's quite frankly tragic that people are in this position. I mean, musicians aren't asking, none of us believe that we're owed a living, that otherwise we would maybe work in another sector. People do it because they're good at it, and they do it because they love it, and they believe in it. They believe in the value of it.